I sat in the lawyer's office, fidgeting with my worn baseball cap as Mr. Henderson shuffled through the papers. The mahogany desk between us felt like a canyon, and the ticking grandfather clock in the corner marked each second of my growing anxiety. My cousins, Jake and Tommy, lounged in their chairs with smug expressions, already counting their chickens before they hatched. To my grandson, Michael, Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady and professional, "I leave the old hay baler in the north barn, along with the small plot of land where it sits." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Jake snorted, a sound that quickly escalated into full-blown laughter. Tommy joined in, slapping his knee like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. "That old piece of junk?" Jake wheezed between laughs. "Grandpa must have really had it out for you, Mike." Tommy wiped tears from his eyes. "I haven't seen that thing run in 20 years. It's nothing but rust and broken dreams." I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. While they inherited the main farmhouse, the profitable acreage, and the modern equipment, I got what everyone considered worthless scrap metal. The lawyer continued reading, but their snickering drowned out most of it. As we left the office, Jake patted my shoulder with mock sympathy. "Don't worry, cousin. Maybe you can sell it for scrap metal. Might get you enough for a nice dinner." I drove home in silence, their laughter still echoing in my ears. That night, I lay awake wondering what Grandpa had been thinking. He'd always been sharp as a tack, never did anything without reason. Maybe there was something I was missing. The next morning, I drove out to the old farm with a thermos of coffee and a heavy heart. The north barn stood like a weathered sentinel against the gray sky, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. I hadn't been inside in years, not since I was a kid helping Grandpa with the harvest. The barn doors creaked on rusty hinges as I pulled them open. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through gaps in the weathered boards. And there it sat, my inheritance. The hay baler looked even worse than I remembered. Rust had claimed most of its green paint, leaving behind a patchwork of orange and brown. Weeds grew up through its wheels, and a family of sparrows had built a nest in what used to be the operator's seat. I walked around it slowly, my boots crunching on scattered straw and debris. The machine was massive, easily 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. Despite its decrepit appearance, there was something almost majestic about it, like a sleeping giant from a bygone era. I ran my hand along its side, feeling the rough texture of rust and old metal. "What were you thinking, Grandpa?" I whispered to the empty barn. A sudden gust of wind rattled the barn doors, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice. "Sometimes the most valuable things don't look like much on the surface, boy." I shook my head, attributing the memory to wishful thinking. But as I stood there in the dusty silence, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Jake and Tommy's mockery define this moment. This was my inheritance, and I was going to figure out what Grandpa saw in it. I returned the following Saturday with cleaning supplies, work gloves, and a determination that surprised even me. If this hay baler was going to be mine, I was at least going to treat it with respect. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Starting with a wire brush, I began attacking the surface rust. Each stroke revealed more of the original green paint underneath, like uncovering a hidden treasure. The work was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. With each section I cleaned, I felt more connected to both the machine and my grandfather's memory. Hours passed without me noticing. The sun climbed higher, warming my back as I worked. I found myself talking to the old baler like it was a patient in need of healing. "Come on, old girl," I muttered, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn patch. "Let's see what you're really made of." As I cleaned around the main housing, my fingers found something unexpected, a small metal plate, barely visible under decades of grime. I scrubbed harder, revealing raised letters and numbers. It was a manufacturer's plate, but the text was still too dirty to read clearly. I grabbed a bottle of water from my truck and poured it over the plate, then scrubbed with renewed vigor. Slowly, the words became visible. International Harvester Model 47, serial number 1847, manufactured 1952. Something about those numbers nagged at me, but I couldn't place why. I made a mental note to research the model later. For now, I was content to keep cleaning, each revealed detail making the machine feel less like junk and more like a piece of history. By sunset, the transformation was remarkable. It still needed work, but the hay baler had regained some of its dignity. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, searching for information about International Harvester Model 47 hay balers. The glow from the screen was the only light in my small farmhouse kitchen, and the silence was broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. What I found surprised me. The Model 47 wasn't just any hay baler. It was part of a limited production run from the early 1950s. International Harvester had experimented with several design innovations in this model, but production issues led to only a few hundred being manufactured before they switched to a different design. I scrolled through forum posts from antique farm equipment enthusiasts, my coffee growing cold as I read. These collectors spoke about the Model 47 with reverence, calling it the holy grail of vintage hay balers. Apparently, most had been scrapped or had deteriorated beyond repair decades ago. One forum post caught my attention. Still searching for a Model 47 in any condition, willing to pay top dollar for the right machine. These are incredibly rare. I've been looking for 15 years. My heart started beating faster. Could my rusty inheritance actually be valuable? I looked up the serial number ranges mentioned in various posts. According to one collector, serial numbers in the 1800s were among the earliest produced, making them even more desirable. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. If this information was accurate, Jake and Tommy's worthless junk might be worth more than anyone imagined, but I needed to be sure. I couldn't get my hopes up based on internet forums alone. I decided to do more research before telling anyone about my findings. The last thing I wanted was to look foolish if I was wrong. After a week of online research, I found Dr. Patricia Wells, a professor of agricultural history at the State University who specialized in vintage farm equipment. When I called her office, I was surprised by how quickly she agreed to come look at the baler. "A Model 47?" she said, her voice rising with excitement. "I haven't seen one of those in person in over a decade. I'll be there Thursday afternoon." Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the morning giving the barn a thorough cleaning, wanting to present the baler in the best possible light. I even brought in a couple of work lamps to illuminate the machine properly. Dr. Wells arrived in a dusty Honda Civic, looking nothing like the stuffy academic I'd imagined. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing jeans and work boots. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw the hay baler. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, walking slowly around the machine. "This is absolutely incredible. The condition is remarkable for its age." She pulled out a magnifying glass and began examining various parts, taking notes in a small notebook. "The serial number puts this in the first production run. See this casting mark here, and the way the pickup mechanism is designed? These were the experimental features that made this model so special." I watched her work, my excitement building with each enthusiastic comment. "So it's actually valuable?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked up at me with a smile that made my heart race. "Mr. Thompson, you have no idea what you've got here. This isn't just valuable, it's historically significant." Dr. Wells spent another hour examining every inch of the hay baler, her excitement growing with each discovery. She photographed serial numbers, measured components, and even crawled underneath to examine the chassis. I held the work light steady, hanging on her every word. "The pickup teeth are original," she explained, pointing to the metal tines that would have gathered hay. Most of these were replaced over the years with generic parts, but yours still has the patented International Harvester design. And look here, the compression chamber still has the original hydraulic seals. She stood up, brushing dust from her jeans, and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you something important. Are you planning to sell this machine?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought that far ahead. Why? Because if you are, I know several collectors who would be very interested, but more importantly, the Smithsonian's Museum of American History has been looking for a Model 47 for their agricultural exhibit. They want to showcase the innovation period of American farming in the 1950s. My mouth went dry. The Smithsonian? The historical significance of this machine can't be overstated. It represents a pivotal moment in agricultural mechanization. The design innovations tested in the Model 47 influenced hay baler development for decades. She paused, studying my face. But even if you're not interested in donating it to a museum, the collector value alone is substantial. I swallowed hard. How substantial? She smiled. Well, the last Model 47 that sold at auction, and it was in much worse condition than yours, went for $47,000. That was 3 years ago. Values have only gone up since then. The barn suddenly felt like it was spinning around me. I drove home in a daze, Dr. Wells's words echoing in my mind. $47,000, maybe more. The rusty old hay baler that my cousins had mocked was worth more than most people's cars. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a long time, trying to process what I'd learned. Part of me wanted to call Jake and Tommy immediately to rub their faces in their mistake. But a wiser part of me urged caution. I needed to think this through carefully. Dr. Wells had given me the contact information for 3 serious collectors and the curator at the Smithsonian. She'd also warned me about the importance of proper authentication and documentation. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Grandpa and wondering if he'd known what he was leaving me. Had he researched the baler's value? Or had he simply seen something in me that made him think I'd appreciate it more than my cousins would? I remembered the summers I'd spent on his farm as a kid, following him around as he worked. While Jake and Tommy were more interested in swimming or video games, I'd always been fascinated by the machinery. Grandpa had patiently explained how everything worked, from the simplest hand tools to the most complex equipment. "A machine is only as good as the person operating it," he used to say, "but a good machine in the right hands can change everything." Maybe he had known. Maybe this wasn't just about the money, but about teaching me something about value and perception, about not judging things by their appearance, about the importance of looking deeper. I finally drifted off to sleep around dawn, dreaming of rust and metal and my grandfather's knowing smile. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. The caller ID showed an out-of-state number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Hartwell. Dr. Wells gave me your number. I understand you have a Model 47 International Harvester hay baler." His voice was eager, almost breathless. I could hear the excitement he was trying to contain. "Yes, that's right. I've been collecting vintage farm equipment for 30 years, and the Model 47 is the one machine that's eluded me. Dr. Wells sent me some photos, and I have to say, your machine appears to be in exceptional condition for its age." I sipped my coffee, trying to sound nonchalant. "What exactly are you thinking?" "I'd like to make you an offer. Sight unseen, based on Dr. Wells's assessment and the photos, I'm prepared to offer you $55,000, cash. I can have a transport truck there by the end of the week." I nearly choked on my coffee. $55,000. That was more than Dr. Wells had estimated, and he was offering it without even seeing the machine in person. That's a generous offer," I managed. "Mr. Thompson, you have to understand, this isn't just about money for me. I've been searching for a Model 47 for over a decade. It would complete my collection." I have a climate-controlled barn where it would be properly preserved and displayed. I told him I needed time to think about it, but he pressed on. I could go as high as $60,000 if you can guarantee the serial number and confirm that the major components are original. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. $60,000. For a machine my cousins had called worthless junk. I couldn't keep the news to myself any longer. That afternoon, I called Jake and asked him to meet me at the local diner. When he arrived, Tommy was with him, both wearing their usual cocky grins. "So, Mike," Jake said, sliding into the booth across from me, "figured out what to do with your pile of rust yet? Tommy here thinks you should turn it into a planter for your front yard." They both laughed at their own joke. I waited for them to finish, then pulled out my phone and showed them the photos Dr. Wells had taken, along with her preliminary assessment email. "What's this?" Tommy asked, squinting at the screen. "That's my pile of rust being evaluated by an expert from the state university. Turns out it's a pretty rare machine." Jake's smile faltered slightly. "Rare how?" I told them everything. The limited production run, the historical significance, Dr. Wells's excitement, and finally, Robert Hartwell's offer. With each detail, their expressions grew more serious, the color draining from their faces. "60,000? Jake whispered. "Dollars?" Tommy added unnecessarily. "That's the current offer, but I'm told it could go higher at auction, especially with proper documentation and restoration." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. "Look, Mike, maybe we should talk about this. I mean, we're family, right? Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement." I'd been expecting this. "What kind of arrangement?" "Well, technically, the will might be open to interpretation. I mean, Grandpa wasn't exactly in his right mind toward the end." The suggestion hit me like a slap. Our grandfather had been sharp until the day he died, and they knew it. I looked at my cousins across the diner table, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The entitlement in their eyes, the way they assumed they deserved a piece of what I'd inherited, made my stomach turn. "Grandpa was perfectly sound when he wrote that will," I said quietly. "You both know that, and you both had your chance to object during the reading." Jake leaned forward, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "Come on, Mike. We're family. Surely you don't need all that money yourself." "You're right," I said, standing up from the booth. "We are family. Which makes it even more disappointing that you're trying to take something that isn't yours." Tommy grabbed my arm as I started to leave. "Wait, let's be reasonable here. How about we split it 3 ways? 20,000 each. That's still more money than any of us expected." I pulled my arm free. "You mean more money than you expected me to get? You were perfectly happy with your inheritance when you thought mine was worthless." "But we didn't know," Jake started. "Exactly. You didn't know, and you didn't care to find out. You just assumed it was junk and laughed at me for getting it." I threw a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. "Grandpa left me that hay baler for a reason. Maybe it was because he knew I'd appreciate it, or maybe it was because he knew you wouldn't." As I walked toward the door, Jake called after me. "This isn't over, Mike. We'll contest the will if we have to." I turned back to face them one last time. "Go ahead and try. But remember, you're the ones who called it worthless junk in front of witnesses. Good luck explaining to a judge why you suddenly want a piece of something you publicly mocked." That evening, I sat in the barn with the hay baler, a folding chair positioned so I could look at it while I thought. The work lights cast long shadows across the machine, making it look almost alive in the dim space. I'd brought a beer and my grandfather's old photo album, the one filled with pictures of the farm through the decades. Flipping through the pages, I found several photos of the hay baler in its prime. There was Grandpa, probably in his 30s, standing proudly beside the gleaming green machine. In another photo, he was teaching my father how to operate it. The pride in both their faces was unmistakable. Robert Hartwell had called twice more, raising his offer to $65,000. The curator from the Smithsonian had also reached out, explaining how the hay baler would be featured in a permanent exhibit about American agricultural innovation. They couldn't offer money, but they could offer something else: the knowledge that the machine would be preserved and appreciated by future generations. I thought about what Grandpa would want. He'd been a practical man, never one to turn down a good deal. $65,000 would solve a lot of my financial problems. I could pay off my mortgage, fix up my own farm, maybe even quit my part-time job in town. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I realized the money wasn't the most important thing. This hay baler represented something bigger, a connection to my family's history, to the land, to a way of life that was rapidly disappearing. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dr. Wells's number. When she answered, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Mr. Thompson, it's rather late. Is everything all right?" "Dr. Wells, I've made my decision about the hay baler. I want to donate it to the Smithsonian," I told Dr. Wells. The words felt right as soon as I spoke them. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Are you certain? I know Mr. Hartwell made you a very generous offer." "I'm certain. This machine belongs in a museum where people can learn from it." Grandpa always said farming was about more than just making money. It was about feeding people, taking care of the land, preserving something important for future generations. Dr. Wells's voice was warm with approval. "I think your grandfather would be very proud of this decision. The Smithsonian will ensure the hay baler is properly restored and displayed with full credit to your family's donation." We spent the next hour discussing the logistics. The museum would arrange for professional transport, and they wanted to include the story of my inheritance in the exhibit description. They were particularly interested in the fact that the machine had been dismissed as worthless by some family members, only to be revealed as historically significant. After I hung up, I sat in the barn for a while longer, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in weeks. Tomorrow, I'd have to deal with Jake and Tommy's reaction. I'd probably have to endure more accusations and arguments. But tonight, I was content with my choice. I thought about all the visitors who would see the hay baler in the museum, learning about the innovation and hard work that had shaped American agriculture. School children would read about the Thompson family farm and understand how one machine had represented a turning point in farming technology. That seemed like a better legacy than $65,000 in my bank account. 6 months later, I stood in the Smithsonian's Museum of American History, watching a group of school children gather around my grandfather's hay baler. The machine had been beautifully restored, its green paint gleaming under the museum lights. A brass plaque beside it read, "International Harvester Model 47 Hay Baler, 1952. Donated by the Thompson family farm." The tour guide was explaining how the innovative design had influenced agricultural equipment for decades. "This particular machine," she said, "represents the ingenuity and experimentation that characterized American farming in the post-war era. It was donated by a family that recognized its historical value even when others saw only scrap metal." One of the children raised her hand. "Did the family get any money for it?" The guide smiled. "Sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars. This family chose to share their treasure with all of us." I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Dr. Wells approaching. "How does it feel to see it here?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect. Jake and Tommy had eventually stopped their legal threats when they realized they had no case. They still weren't speaking to me, but that was their choice. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about shared values and mutual respect. As I watched the children studying the hay baler with wide-eyed curiosity, I knew I'd made the right decision. Grandpa's gift hadn't just been a machine, it had been a lesson about recognizing true value, about looking beyond surface appearances, and about the importance of preserving our history. The rusty old hay baler had taught me more than my cousin's laughter ever could. Sometimes the things that seem worthless hold the greatest treasures of all.